Hell must have frozen over because the New Mutants are finally out after the most troubled release journeys in my memory. In fact, the film has grown into a sort of legend among the movie fans community where we speculated that it would just be delayed indefinitely until the end of time or just pulled from schedule altogether and never shown anywhere to anyone. The movie was made back in 2017, 3 years ago, and was originally supposed to open in cinemas in April 2018. First, it was delayed by Fox executives because they were unhappy with the movie and wanted to do reshoots. Apparently, the director's vision was horror oriented and the executives wanted to tone things down. Then the Disney merger happened, and the movie was delayed again because of all the organizational bullshit. Then Disney said, you know what, let's just scratch the reshoots after all, partly because the film is okay as it is for us, partly because it's been 2 years at this point and the teenager actors have grown so much that they look different. They just gave it back to the director, gave him some notes on how to re-edit it into what they wanted, and that was that. And then the pandemic began and movie theaters shut down about a month before the New Mutants were supposed to be released again. But now, after 2 more delays, it's finally out, and to my surprise, it's actually not that bad. After all this trouble, I honestly expected it to completely suck, but especially looking at some of the previous X-Men movies like Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix, which were the most recent ones. But it doesn't. It's not great either. I'd say it's just average, but maybe average is good in this case. So, it's another comic book movie based on the New Mutants, specifically on the 1980s comic book run, comic book storyline called The Demon Bear, which was supposedly pretty fucking great. I haven't read it myself, but I know it has a lot of fans. The film is the final one in the X-Men franchise as done by Fox, although it only slightly references the existence of other characters. You don't need to see any of the other films to understand what's going on. It was originally supposed to be more interconnected and set up a potential trilogy, with John Hamm even filming some scenes as Nathaniel Essex, aka Mr. Sinister, but these scenes were all cut out since we know for sure that Disney is not interested in continuing the franchise as it was. The story in the film is this. In the opening sequence, we see a young Native American girl named Dani Moonstar become the only survivor of a catastrophe that destroys her village in the middle of the night. We don't see exactly what happens, but we can hear what sounds like a great beast demolishing the place and killing everybody, and there's clearly a hint of a supernatural force. Dani then wakes up in an almost empty medical facility run by Dr. Reyes. She explains to Dani that she's a mutant, much like X-Men, and her powers are beginning to manifest now that she's entered puberty. Therefore, she needs to undergo therapy. On the one hand, to cope with trauma, on the other, to get a grip, to learn control of her powers. She won't be alone too. There are four other teenagers also present in the facility, each with a power of their own and each with emotional baggage of their own. As things go on though, it quickly becomes apparent that the hospital is more like a prison and that Dr. Reyes may hide more than she lets the kids know. And most importantly, that something sinister is afoot, as all the kids begin to experience these wild, terrifying visions that relate to their past. So first things first, the director has said multiple times he was going for a horror vibe. I wouldn't necessarily describe the film as such, as a straight horror. I don't think it's scary at all. It has creepy elements in it and a few shocking scenes, but overall it's rather mild. I'd describe the tone of it as a mix of horror elements, coming of age / teenage friendship and relationship story a la Breakfast Club, atmosphere of isolation akin to The Shining, and of course the traditional superhero action. I think that there are elements in it that do work really, really well. The fact that the characters are kept quite faithfully to the comics, most of the cast is alright, the special effects look absolutely fantastic, and especially the final act with the kids all using their powers looks and feels like an amazing fan service for comic book fans. The plot holds up for the most part, there aren't really any glaring holes in it, but there are problems as well. The key one for me is pacing and the way that such a cool concept is ultimately wasted in execution. What I mean is that the film somehow doesn't really have a sense of good movement, of the story flowing at a good pace. The first act is very, very slow, and then every once in a while there'll be a scene happening where something begins to happen, something begins to take place actually, and I'm like, wow, this looks great, bring it on, this is now going to be engaging finally. And then very quickly that scene will end, and this tension fizzles out, and we're back to teenage dialogue. And it happens multiple times. It's like the filmmakers didn't really know how to tell their story in an engaging and interesting way. Moments of genuine thrill are constantly interrupted by longer stretches of nothing happening. What's interesting is there are at least 3 scenes where that slowdown happened, and I thought to myself, why do I feel like it's getting boring again? On paper, this is still a pretty intense moment. Even if there isn't action, the dialogue should be gripping, even if it is just dialogue. And I realized that a lot of the times the music is at fault. The score doesn't help maintain that tension. It does the opposite thing. It's in scenes where something gripping is happening, the music relaxes the atmosphere, slows it down, and so I stopped caring again on a subconscious level. It's a very weird thing. I can't think of any other film that that made me experience such a thing, that failed in this particular way. But hey, learn something new every day. Apart from this major issue, I think the dialogue is not the strongest suit of the movie. I think both it and the interactions between the characters are kind of clunky and bland and lack some sort of flair. There is some questionable editing when it comes to cutting between different scenes happening at the same time. And the actress who plays Dani Moonstar, Blue Hunt, is arguably the weakest member of the cast, which, it isn't very good when she's the main character. So the New Mutants is a bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, it has spectacular moments when it comes to comic book visuals and the action, and has individual scenes that made you go, wow, this is really great. On the other hand, it has a fair share of problems that prevent me from calling it a good film overall. I think at the end of the day, it's perfectly average. It's not great, not terrible. I don't feel like I wasted time watching it, but I also think you can skip it without any regrets.